Morning. I want to wish you, for the mothers, a happy Mother's Day. My name is Jordan. If you want to stand with us, we're going to begin our service with some worship. Come on.
Good morning. How you guys doing? Nice. Love it. My name is DJ. I co-lead our young adult ministry here called United. So if you are 18 to 28 and have not gotten plugged into the young adult ministry yet, please find me after service. I will be in the lobby. I would love to connect with you there. Welcome to Grace. For the first-time guests, we actually have a gift waiting for you at the Welcome Center in the lobby. So to get that free gift, you have to fill out the Connect card. Every service, I forget to bring up a Connect card. So this is Connect card. There's a Connect card in the seat back in front of you. So to get that free gift, if you're a first-time guest, fill out that Connect card and give it at the Welcome Center. Or if you're looking to get plugged in, if you want information about baptisms or some classes or anything, fill out that Connect card, and you can take it to the Welcome Center. We can get you plugged in that way. Next, Happy Mother's Day. Round of applause for our moms, right? We have artisan coffee, not artesian coffee. Let me clarify that. I messed that up the first service. Artisan coffee in the lobby, okay? We love you, moms. Artisan coffee. I'm gonna nail it next service. It was not a next service. All right. Happy Mother's Day, moms. And then for the dads, for the fathers here that are just now realizing that it's Mother's Day, good luck. I will pray for you. For the next announcement, I actually am going to invite up Pastor Tony.
Yeah, thanks. Well, like DJ said, happy Mother's Day to those of you who are in the room. And if you're watching on live stream too, happy Mother's Day to you guys. And I just have one quick kind of special announcement here today. And it's actually directed specifically to those who call the Medina East Campus home. And so if you're part of the family of the Medina East Campus, this is a little bit more directed to you. But kind of a special announcement. It's a little bit of a reiteration of something that Pastor Seth mentioned last week. And so if you missed last week, Pastor Seth got up here and I was actually talking about a announcement as it relates to Power Kids, our Power Kids ministry. So if you've been coming to Grace for any length of time, you probably know that we operate off of a very deeply held set of values, and that's kind of how we think and how we process and make decisions. And one of those values that we hold very dear to our heart is the value that we are fully committed to kids and students. And so the way that we articulate that value, you can kind of see it up here, is we say we unapologetically devote major resources and energy towards shaping a God-centered worldview during a person's prime developmental years. And basically what we mean is that we want to be a church that is very serious and is very active in investing in the next generation. Our whole hope is that we can see a cascading intergenerational investment that one generation is pouring to and is investing in the next. It's a huge part of the vision here at Grace. It actually helps make sense of a lot of the things that we do as a campus. But because of that, we've been regathering in the midst of a COVID season. We've been working to regather as a church. And we've actually been really excited about how that's been going. We've been noticing that each week, more and more people are excited and are able to come back and get reconnected to in-person services. We know that not everybody is, and that's okay. Some people are still doing the live stream thing as we're working to regather. But what we've been saying is that as we've been regathering, we've actually been facing some unique challenges in doing that. And so some of the unique challenges are, how do we regather in a safe way? How do we do that in a responsible way? How do we do that in a considerate way? And there's been some unique challenges with that, but believe it or not, the biggest challenge that we've been facing is not so much in the auditorium. There are challenges in how to regather in a space like this. But right now, our biggest challenge has actually been back in Power Kids. And so many of you know, if you have kids and you're part of the Medina East Campus family, right now we rely on an RSVP system, and that RSVP system is less than ideal, I think, for everyone, for you and for us and for our teams in those ways. And so the reason that we've been doing that is because we've been having to try to limit and been trying to cap the amount of kids that we have connected in Power Kids. And I want you to know that the reason that we're doing that is actually not so much a space issue. It's actually, believe it or not, more of a personnel issue that we're facing. And so as you can imagine, as we've been regathering in COVID, there's a number of people who were engaged in Power Kids for very legitimate reasons, had to disengage for a season for health considerations and family considerations and those type of things. But because of that, it's been a little slower trying to rebuild our Power Kids. And so because of that, Crystal Bennis and our Power Kids team did an awesome job of creating some very specific and clear and easy ways to get connected to serving back in Power Kids. And so if you go back to the Power Kids area, you're gonna see that there's a bunch of discs that look like this, a bunch of these colored circles, and on them are different ways that you can get connected and you can get involved in helping with the Power Kids ministry. And so I just wanna tell you that if you're a person who shares that same passion and that same value that we do, that we wanna invest in the next generation, this is a great opportunity. It's a need, but it's also an opportunity for you to get connected in that ministry. And so check that out after service, go back to the Power Kids section, pick up one of these circles, there's the need, and then on the back is some information about what you need to do. So I would encourage you to do that. And then lastly, let me just say this too. For so many of you, last week we made this announcement, And 21 of these circles were taken just last week, which is unreal. So thank you so much for your responsiveness. Thank you for your passion and your investment in investing in the next generation. I just want to encourage you to keep it up as we have some more opportunities to do that. All right, so I think DJ has one more announcement for us before we jump in for today. So we'll do that, but check out the Power Kids stuff if you get a chance to. So thanks.
Yeah, the last announcement we have for you guys is May 22nd and 23rd. We are having a weekend where we get to be, it's called Love Medina. We get to be the hands and feet of Jesus in the community. So I'm actually going to let Steve tell you that via video. So we'll get into that video and then enjoy the service. Love you guys.
Hey everyone, let's talk Love Medina. What's that about anyway? Well, it's about Matthew 5. What's Matthew 5? It's all about being the salt of the earth and the light of the world. And through Love Medina, we want to do this in very tangible ways. So, as a practical realization of being salt and light in our community and in collaboration with community leaders, we are launching an annual weekend of service on May 22nd to 23rd called Love Medina. Our hope is to mobilize our church and eventually other Medina area churches to tangibly share the love of Jesus with our community. This isn't a weekend off, but instead, we are spending the weekend out as a church. Sound good? Awesome. Let's dive into what our weekend out together will be like. First, on Friday, we are encouraging anyone to take a prayer walk through downtown Medina in anticipation of the weekend ahead. A simple guide is provided for you at our website at medinaeast.gracechurches.org/giveitaway. Second, both Saturday and Sunday will look identical. So we'll start either day off at the campus together for a light breakfast, a quick time of worship and prayer and vision for the day ahead. After that, you'll connect with your team, gather your supplies, and get to work on your team's projects. Is that right, Christian?
Sure, but what do the projects look like?
Good point. I'm glad you asked, man, because I don't know. Just kidding, kind of. We are, after all, just figuring this all out for the first time. But anyways, the projects that we do have, they're gonna include exterior maintenance, such as landscaping, painting, minor repairs, general cleanup, and things like that. There will also be some light project options for those who need to serve in a different way. Maybe that doesn't require physical labor. We'll even have things to do from your home. So everyone should sign up. And by the way, these projects aren't the goal. The goal is to connect with our community and relationship. So I want to encourage you that way. But after the project is completed, we are encouraging everyone to share a meal to celebrate with your team or families out in Medina community by either supporting a local restaurant or having a picnic on the square. Now, let's talk about how. So, since we are not having normal services that weekend, we're calling anyone who calls Medina East home to sign up and get involved. So how we do that? You can sign up at our website at medinaeast.gracechurches.org/giveitaway. From there, you can register yourself, you and a few others, or register as a whole team. If you don't have a team, don't worry. We'll get everyone who signs up plugged in and connected with a team. Could that be awkward? No more than having a conversation with me. So there you go. Also, if you know of projects that we could be doing in our community, there's a form for that as well. So I encourage you to fill that out if you know of any projects that we could be doing. So that's it. From there, your team captain will be in charge of the details and organizing your team. So don't hesitate to reach out to them with questions on more specifics for the weekend. So for recap, I'm excited to be taking this weekend out as a church together to share the love of Jesus with our community, to be salt and light to Medina. So mark your calendars from May 22nd to 23rd and to sign up. Or if you need any other information, you can go to our website. Again, medinaeast.gracechurches.org/giveitaway.
Man, I don't know about you, I never felt more hyped up about salt. That's a hype video if I have ever seen one, so that's great. Man, yeah, great to have you guys here at the Medina East Campus. Welcome. And we already said, for those who are in the room who bear the title of mother, and we know that title can come in a lot of different ways, but we just want to say Happy Mother's Day to you. And then, of course, if you're watching on live stream right now, we just want to say Happy Mother's Day to you as well. In fact, can we do something? Maybe we can just do something kind of fun. How about this? Why don't we say, all of us in the room, why don't we say Happy Mother's Day to all of the moms that are watching on live stream? Can we do that together on the count of 3? You guys want to do that? All right, well, you don't have a choice. So here we go. You ready? 1, 2, 3. Happy Mother's Day. That was good. So hopefully you feel loved. And then if you're on live stream, on the count of 3, you ready? Here we go. 1, 2, 3. No, live stream. That's good. I've never felt more like Dora from Dora the Explorer than just right now in this moment. So there you go. But now for real, it is a great weekend to celebrate moms. I hope you guys feel appreciated. Hope you get dinner together, celebrate together, maybe go skiing this afternoon. I don't know. Have a good time. But for real, Happy Mother's Day. It's also a great weekend to be here at Grace. And the reason is because we are actually beginning today a brand new series that's called Salt and Light. And we oftentimes say that a new series is the greatest opportunity to get connected to our church. And so if you're a first-time guest, you came on a great weekend. And I got to be honest with you, I am really excited about the conversation that we're going to be in for the next 4 weeks. So this series is a 4-week series. And as we start to think about this, as we introduce today's talk and as we introduce this whole series, I actually want to start by asking you a question. I want you to think about a question with me together. And it might seem like a weird question, but I promise you it's related to what we're talking about. And it's a question that's related to labels. Okay, so I want you to think with me for a minute about labeling things. Now, I know we all know what that means, but just for the sake of clarity, what labeling is labeling is the process of attaching a descriptive word or phrase to something or someone in a concise and often a simplistic, sometimes an overly simplistic way. That's what a label is. And so we label all kinds of stuff, right? So for example, we label things in the kitchen. We label ingredients. And so if you think about that, maybe you have sugar or flour, you put it in a container and then you put a label on it. It's a concise, descriptive, simplified way of explaining the contents that are within it. We label not just ingredients in the kitchen, we label household items. In fact, they even sell label makers, which some of you have, and some people go crazy with label makers. I actually thought this was pretty funny. Somebody had a label maker, and they went into the refrigerator and they labeled the eggs really young chickens. So that's kind of creative, kind of fun. But we label all kinds of things, right? We label ingredients, we label household items. But this is something we all know as well, is we also label people, right? We have an inclination as people, for better or for worse, and oftentimes it's usually for worse, to label other individuals, to label human beings. And so we categorize and we attach labels to the way that we perceive and the way that we understand people. And here's the question that I want you to think about with me as we start this series off together. I want you to think about this question. In your opinion and or experience, in what ways do people today tend to label followers of Jesus? And so I just want you to think about that with me for a minute. We all label things, we label people. In what ways, in your experience and in your opinion, what ways do people today tend to label? What are some of the labels people give to followers of Jesus? I want you to think about that. And now here's the thing. I actually want you to answer me, like for real. And so if you're watching this on live stream, I want you to type in the chat, what are some ways that, in your experience, in your opinion, that people label followers of Jesus? And then someone in the room, DJ, who is up here on stage, will shout that out to us. And if you're in the room, I actually just want you to shout it out to me, just like right here in real time. You're like, for real? I'm like, for real. Just shout it out to me. What are some ways, let's brainstorm together, that people label followers of Jesus? So let's go with it. What do you guys think? Holy rollers, I heard. Hypocrite. What else? Back here, I heard something. Nuts, is that what you said? Just nuts. Gotcha, okay, that's a good one. What else? Fanatics, intolerant, Bible thumper. What was this one back here? Closed-minded. Yeah, that's a big label that followers of Jesus are given. What else? What do you guys think? Self-righteous. Yeah, that's a big one that we hear. Brainwashed. What did I hear over here? Delusional. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Happy. That's an interesting one in the midst of all the other ones. That's true. Yeah, happy. That's a good one. Yeah. Online says nut job. So it takes your nuts and it adds job to it. So that's good. Give the nut a job. There you go. That's really good. And as you can see, I mean, you get it. I just want you to think about it for a minute. We could do this all day if we wanted to. In fact, let's just do this for the rest of the service. No, I'm just kidding. But I think when you start to think about it, you realize that there are a lot of different labels that are given to followers of Jesus. And some of them, often they're not positive. Sometimes they're political. Sometimes they are competing. There's different titles that are given to followers of Jesus. And here's why I want you to think about that, is because, did you know, and I thought this was so cool, did you know that Jesus Christ himself, the author and the founder of Christianity, do you know that he actually gave his followers certain labels? Do you know he did that? That he actually put labels, descriptors on the way that he wanted his followers to see themselves and to identify themselves. And interestingly, I just think this is so interesting. Did you know that Jesus never called his disciples, he never called his followers Christians, ever? That was actually not a word that's super familiar in the New Testament. The New Testament only uses the word Christian 3 times to talk about people who follow Jesus. And most of the time it doesn't use that at all. And so what we're going to be doing in this series is we're actually going to look at the earliest and the first label that Jesus put on those who follow him. And we see it in the earliest recorded sermon that Jesus Christ ever preached. And you can probably see where this is going, but let me show it to you. So if you got your Bible, why don't you take it with me? We're going to go to Matthew chapter 5. Okay, so get your Bible, open it up with me, and we're going to go to Matthew chapter 5 together. If you didn't bring a Bible with you today, page 785 in the Bibles that are under the chairs, you can use those. If you don't own a Bible, you can have one. We'd love for you to take a Bible home with you. And here what we're going to see, again, as you're flipping to this passage, we're going to see the earliest recorded, most famous sermon that Jesus Christ ever preached. It's often called the Sermon on the Mount. Some of you, if you're part of Grace, you were with us in the last series. In the last series, we actually did an entire series on the introduction on the Sermon on the Mount, something called the Beatitudes. So that was our last series. In this series, we're talking about the next part of the Sermon on the Mount. And so in this next part, Jesus is talking to his followers, he's talking to his disciples, and he goes on to give them this label. And this is the first label that Jesus gives to those who follow him. And here's what he says. He says in verse 13, you are the, and you guys know this, the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It's no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. He goes on, he says, you are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. Isn't this interesting? It's a pretty famous passage, but isn't it interesting that when Jesus goes to give a label to those who follow him, he says to them, you are the salt of the earth, and you are the light of the world. That's what Jesus says. That's the label he gives to those who follow him. So what we're going to do in this series is real simple, is we're just going to talk about what does that mean? What does that mean when Jesus puts that label on those who follow him? And I actually think, my hope is that the next 4 weeks are going to be helpful for everybody who's in the room and everyone who's watching right now. And what I mean by that is, I know that not everyone here is a follower of Jesus. Some of you maybe are investigating Christianity. Maybe you're still trying to explore your faith and you're not sure what you think about Jesus and about all the things that surround that. And by the way, if that's you, let me just tell you, we just count it such an honor that you'd let us be part of your spiritual investigation. But I actually think that this series, even though we're talking about followers of Jesus, I think this series is going to be very helpful to you. And the reason is because in this series, we are looking at the label that Jesus Christ himself gave to those who follow him. So we're not looking at what is the label that culture gives Christians. We're not looking at that. We're not looking at what is the label that politicians give Christ followers. We're not looking at that. We're not looking at even what is the label that the church gives followers of Jesus. We're talking about, what did Jesus say about those who follow him? So my hope is, if you're a person who's investigating Christianity, that this might help declutter some of the confusion that shrouds the whole topic of what does it mean to follow Jesus. And then of course, for those of us who do follow Jesus, I think it's probably very clear that this series is immediately relevant to us. And my hope is that over this series, it's going to force us to ask a couple of questions. I think number one, it's going to force us to ask this. It's going to force us to ask, do we see ourselves the way that Jesus Christ labels us? Do we actually see ourselves that way? And number two, I think it's going to force us to ask, what if we took seriously the labels that Jesus Christ gave us? What if we did that? What if we took it seriously? So here's what we're gonna do. Today, for the rest of our time, we're just gonna talk about salt. That's all we're gonna do. We're gonna talk about what did Jesus mean when he put this label on his followers and said, you are the salt of the earth. We're gonna think about that. Next week, we're gonna talk about light. Spend the whole time talking about what did Jesus mean when he said, you are the light of the world. Week 3, we're actually gonna get a chance to practice some of the stuff we're learning. So we're gonna do Love Medina, and we're gonna have a chance to get into our community, and we're gonna get a chance to spread out, and we're gonna get a chance to love and serve our community. And so if you haven't signed up for that, you saw the video, I would encourage you to do that. Then the 4th week that we're together, we're gonna come together, we're gonna conclude the whole series, and we're gonna talk about how do we live this as a lifestyle? How does this become not just an event and not just a sermon series, but how do we become salt and light on a day-to-day basis? And so we're gonna talk about that together. So today, we're gonna think about what does it mean when Jesus says you are the salt of the earth. And I think to add clarity to what Jesus means, there's actually 3 aspects that I wanna think about here today about salt, all right? So here's kind of the roadmap. I wanna think about, first off, the effects of salt. So I think it's important for us to understand the metaphor that Jesus is giving here, that we first understand the effects of salt. Number 2, I wanna think about the essence of salt. It's very important that we understand the essence of salt. And then number 3, I wanna talk very practically about, okay, so how do we engage as salt? Okay, so very simple, effects of salt, essence of salt, and then engaging as salt. So let's think about these things together. Let's start at the very top. Let's talk about, first and foremost, the effects of salt, the effects of salt. So whenever you read the Bible, and this is actually something we talk about a lot here at our church, whenever you read the Bible, you have to remember that the words that you're reading and the words that were spoken that you're reading were written to or were spoken to an original audience. That's always important to remember. So before you ask the question, what does this mean to me? You always have to first ask, what did it mean to them? Because it was originally spoken to an original audience. So when Jesus says to this first century audience in the Near East, when he says to them, you are the salt of the earth, we have to first ask, what did that mean to them? What did that mean? So for us, salt obviously means all kinds of things to us. We know what salt is, and we have uses for salt. We use it all the time. But the first question is, well, how did these guys think about salt? And so some of you might know this. Back in the first century, salt was actually an incredibly valuable, and it was expensive, and it was a precious commodity. And so unlike today, today salt's super cheap, but back then it wasn't that way. In fact, salt was so valuable back in the first century, people would actually get paid in salt sometimes. And so Roman soldiers, it was very common for Roman soldiers that part of their compensation package is that they would get paid in salt. That's actually where that very famous axiom comes from. Some of you guys might know this. Did you ever hear someone say that person isn't worth their salt? Did you ever hear that before? I don't know if that's something we use anymore, but that actually finds its origins in the first century back in Rome. And so they would pay people in salt. And the reason it was so valuable and the reason it was so precious is because salt had some very specific and distinct uses in the first century. So one of them was salt was used for flavoring and salt was used for seasoning. And we understand that. That's one of the ways we use salt, right? We put salt on food. It makes it more enjoyable. It makes it more delicious. It makes it more, delightful to eat a meal with salt on it and those kind of things. So they would use it that way, but that actually was not the primary way that they used salt in the first century. In the first century, the primary way that they used salt was that it was a preservative. Some of you guys know that. Salt has a preserving effect. And so back in the first century, they didn't have deep freezers. They didn't have any of that kind of stuff. And so if you didn't want your meat to go bad, if you didn't want your food to go bad, you had to salt it, right? You had to rub salt, soak it in brine, do something like that. And that would fight off decay and that would fight off rot. A lot of you guys know this. Salt has an antibacterial effect to it. And so because of that, not only was it used as a preservative, salt was also used for medicinal purposes. So it was real common back in this time, if you had a gash or you had a wound, that you would rub salt in it. And it sounds super painful, but the reason is because it's fighting off bacteria, it's fighting off infection. So salt was very, very valuable, and it had a preserving effect to it. And so when Jesus says to this first century audience, he says, you are the salt of the world, part of what he means is for sure, you bring flavor to the world that you live in. I think he definitely means that. But I think more so what Jesus is saying here is he's saying to followers of Jesus, you are the preservative of the world. You are the preservative of the world. And I think that's actually a really interesting thought, and I think it's actually very clarifying. And what did Jesus mean when he said that? You are the salt, you are the preservative of the world. I want you to think about this with me for a moment. We all know what a preservative is, but simply defined, a preservative is a substance that's added to food to prevent rotting and decay, right? So that's what salt is. It's what a preservative is. It's something that's put into food and it prevents rotting, it prevents decay. And again, I think this is not only a very helpful and clarifying statement about understanding what followers of Jesus are supposed to be, but I also think that this is subsequently a very, very clarifying statement about the world itself. So think about this. When Jesus says that the world needs a preservative, what is he saying, not just about Christians, but what is he saying about the world? Well, he's saying that the world is rotting and is decaying, and that it needs something that's going to preserve that rot and that decay from happening. In other words, what Jesus is saying is he's saying that the world is subject to decay, that the world is disintegrating, that the world is falling apart, is what Jesus is saying here. And I think that's actually really, really helpful and very honest and very clarifying. My guess is that any of us in this room who have been alive for any length of time would find that Jesus' words are true, that what Jesus' analysis of the world is spot on. I mean, it's just true. Everything around us is disintegrating. Everything is breaking down. And this is true in a lot of different, this is true materially, right? The car that you have is decaying. It's subject to decay. It's breaking down. It's not getting newer, it's getting older. And you have to try to preserve it, right? The house that you have, it's breaking down. Our bodies, right? This is entropy. Entropy is the second law of thermodynamics. Everything is moving from order to chaos, not the other way around. It's happening in our bodies. I know that this is true. All of us are fighting the clock and none of us win. None of us win in that battle. I was just thinking about this the other day. I think I've told you guys this before. I know I'm getting older. I'm 40 now, so I know I'm getting older. And I think I've told you, one of the clear indications that I know I'm getting older is that I'm starting to get sleep-related injuries. You guys know what I'm talking about? You guys get those? Yes. Where you wake up and you're like, man, my back hurts. And people are like, what's the matter? Did you lift something? And you're like, no, I literally laid down for 7 hours last night and now I hurt. It's like, that's a clear indication, right? That it's all, and not only do material items break down, and not only do our bodies break down, but the Bible is going to say that this is true in relationships, that this is true spiritually, that this is true in society. That that everything in creation is subject to decay. And so in our relationships have a natural trajectory. They have a natural drift towards falling apart. They're always eroding and they're always decaying. And so unless you work to preserve that relationship, unless you work to try to fend off the decay that happens through bitterness and through offense and through unforgiveness and through those things, unless you're willing to do the work, relationships are always going to disintegrate. Even the closest of human relationships. You think about marriage, right? In our marriages, anyone who's a married person would tell you that from the moment you say I do, the natural drift in your marriage is not towards health. It never naturally trends that way. You have to work on that. You have to try to preserve the love that you had at the beginning and try to fight and fend for a healthy relationship within your marriage. And Jesus is going to say, this is true in relationships, this is true in the world, this is true in the marriage, and this is true in society. This is true about everything around us, that there's a consistent theme in the Bible, and the Bible is going to tell us that culture has a way of degrading, morally degrading, that things get worse, that things often, if there's not something trying to preserve it, they'll rot and they'll stink within society. Moral degradation is going to take place and it's going to happen. And I'll tell you, I know for some of you, when I say that everything is breaking down, that the world is decaying, when you see Jesus saying that, for some of you, you think, man, that sounds really pessimistic. It sounds really, in fact, some of you might be thinking, if you're a person investigating Jesus, you might be thinking, you see, that right there, that's my problem with Christians. Christians are always talking about how sinful things are and how things are, morally decaying and eroding. And you might be thinking, I tend to be a more optimistic person. And I think that things are getting better. And I think that there's hope for a better future within the world that we live in. And can I just tell you that I think that Jesus' words here are not pessimistic. I think they're extremely realistic. I think history has just proven what he said to be true. Have you guys noticed that no matter how many advancements we make in society and culture. Technological advancements, medical advancements, psychological advancements, educational advancements. It doesn't matter how many advancements we make in those areas, it seems like over and over again we see that there is a moral decline that tends to happen within society, that those things don't counteract. I think Jesus is just being honest here. You see, I think that we all kind of see that. We all see that there's this breakdown that happens. There's a brokenness that happens within a society. And we all have different solutions to what we think is the antidote to that decay. And so some people would say, maybe some people would say this, they'd say that education is the salt of the earth. And so the way that you fight against the brokenness that we see in society is that we just need education reform. And so if we can just educate people to a certain standard, and if we can make sure that we impart the right teachings to people, then that's going to be the thing that's going to fight the brokenness and combat the decay that we see in the world around us. Some people would say that. Some people would say this. They'd say, no, maybe not education, politics are the salt of the earth. How do you fight against the moral decay that we see around us? Well, you have to make sure you have the right political agenda. And if you have the political party in place that can legislate the laws of evil things away, that's going to be the way that you preserve morality in a society. Some people would say that. Some people would say, well, no, not politics, but psychology is the salt of the earth. And so if we could just untangle our psychological issues and rewire the way that we think, then we could overcome the brokenness in the world. And here's what Jesus is saying. And you guys, I think this is so powerful what Jesus is saying. He's saying, actually, no, none of those things are the salt of the earth. As important as those things are, and please hear me, these are all very important, very important. I'm not trying to downplay that at all. In fact, I think salt needs to affect every single one of these things. But Jesus is going to say, no, these things are not the salt of the earth. Jesus looks at followers of him and he says, no, you are the salt of the earth. In other words, Jesus is saying, listen, the world needs salt. The world needs it. And there's only one salt, and it's you. It's those who follow. I think that's a very powerful statement that Jesus is making. In fact, I love the way John Stott puts it. John Stott is a Christian author and commentator. He says this. He said, we should not ask what's wrong with the world that we live in, for that diagnosis has already been given. I love that. He says we shouldn't ask what's wrong with the world. Why? Because we already know what's wrong with the world. Jesus just told us. It's decaying. It's breaking down. He says we shouldn't ask that. Rather, we should ask what's happened to the salt and what's happened to the light. See, I think for those of us who follow Jesus, what Jesus is saying is we can't be mad at the world for breaking down, just any more than you can be mad at meat for going bad. The question isn't what's wrong with the world. The question is, where's the salt? The question is the salt involved? Is the salt present? Is the salt there? So Jesus says, I want you to be the salt. I want you to be the thing that preserves relationships, the thing that preserves morality within society in which you live in. I think this is actually a part of what Jesus had in mind. Look at Mark chapter 9. I think this is super helpful. Jesus says, salt is good, but if it loses its saltiness, how can you make it salty again? Then he says something kind of peculiar. He says, have salt among yourselves. That's kind of a weird thing to say. I've never heard anyone say that before. Have salt among yourselves. And look what he says, and be at peace with each other. You see the connection that Jesus is making? He says, listen, salt is a relational preservative. One of the effects of salt in relationships is that you have peace, with other people. It's intended to be that way. I think what Jesus is telling us is simply that followers of him are supposed to be counteractive agents of moral rot and decay within the world in which we live, in our environment, whether it's in our school or our university or our families or in our society. He says, you are the preservative, which leads me to the second thing that I think is very important, and that's this, the essence of salt. Talk about the essence of salt. Now, at this point in the sermon, if you're still paying attention, you might be thinking to yourself, okay, so I hear what you're saying. I understand what you're saying. You're saying that Jesus says followers of him are to be the preservatives of the world. We are to fight against the decay that we see in the world around us. We're to bring flavor and we're to preserve. I get it. But you might be asking yourself, okay, so tell me how? How do followers, you might be craving practicality. Tell me, what do I need to do to be salt? How do I need to do this? And let me just say, before we talk about that, and so many of us are inclined towards practicality, we're inclined towards action, which I think is a good thing. But let me just say, before we talk about that and how to engage, I think it's very, very important that we first understand the essence of salt. I think we need to understand this. In fact, this is so important. Let me see if I can say it a few ways to make it really clear. So let me put it this way. I think when it comes to salt, we have to understand that essence comes before action. Okay, essence has to come before action. Let me put it another way, just to make it as clear as I can. You cannot have the effects of salt. You cannot have the effects of salt if you lose the essence of salt. You can't. Let me say it another way. Just want to be as clear as I can. Before you do anything, you have to first be something. You have to be something. And you can't have the effects of salt if you have lost the essence of salt. Now, some of you might be hearing me and you might be saying, I think I know what you're saying, but it seems like that's a big deal to you. Why is that such a big deal? And I'll tell you why it's a big deal. It's a big deal because Jesus says it's a big deal. In fact, can I just show you? Let me just show you what Jesus says right after he says, you are the salt of the earth. Look what he says next. He says, you are the salt of the earth. He doesn't say, therefore go do stuff. That's not what he says, not yet. He says, you are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It's no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and to be trampled underfoot. Now, isn't this interesting? Do you see what Jesus says? He doesn't say, you're the salt of the world, now get out there and do it. It's not what he says. He says, you're the salt of the earth, so first and foremost, don't lose your saltiness. Don't lose your saltiness. In other words, I think what Jesus is saying is distinctiveness needs to precede usefulness. And maybe one of the most obvious characteristics of salt, I don't know if you guys ever thought about this, one of the most obvious characteristics is that salt is totally distinct. There's nothing quite like salt, is there? There's just nothing like it. Like if I asked you, what's out there that tastes like salt? You'd probably be like, I don't know, I guess salt. Like salty things taste like salt. And I'm like, right, it's unique. There's nothing else that's quite like salt. And I think what Jesus is saying is there should be nothing else. There should be nothing else that's quite like followers of Jesus. Followers of Jesus should be so distinct and should be so different. They should be so foreign and they should be so alien of anything else, and they should never lose their distinctiveness. In other words, I could put it this way. I think Jesus is saying if you lose your distinctiveness, you will lose your effectiveness. And so you cannot lose your saltiness. You have to remain salt. And so this begs an important question. And the question is, if Christians are to be distinct, and Christians are to be different, and Christians are to be weird, that's kind of what he's saying here. Christians are to be totally set apart. The question is, in what ways are Christians supposed to be distinct? In which ways are Christ followers supposed to be distinct? Because let's be honest, there's a lot of ways that Christians are weird that I don't think Jesus has in mind here. I think we all would probably agree with that. And so for some of us, when we think about Christians are weird or Christians are distinct, sometimes we think, well, that means that they need to be distinctly socially awkward. And I don't think that's what Jesus means here, right? For example, for some of us, we might think of maybe a picture of a guy like this, right? We might think, oh, okay, distinctly weird. And that's actually kind of a joke. That's Dan Miller. He helps lead our student ministries. And so he's not socially awkward. In fact, I would tell you to entrust your middle school and high school kids with him. That's what I'd tell you to do. But no, sometimes we think what it means to be a follower of Jesus means you have to be distinctly socially inept. And I don't think that's what Jesus means when he says this. Sometimes we think that to be a follower of Jesus means you have to be distinctly annoying or irritating. Many of those labels that you guys gave me. For example, I had a friend with me share this picture here. Do you guys ever get anything like this on social media? Someone, a follower of Jesus, shares this. Peter, do you love me? You know I do. Then share this Facebook post. You guys ever get stuff like that on social media? Some of you aren't laughing because you're the one who shares stuff like this. I just want to tell you, that's not what Jesus means when he says to be weird. That's not what he means. So stop that, all right? So for some of us, when we think distinct, we think, well, it means that we need to be distinctly harsh or opinionated. It's where a lot of those labels came from that we just talked about right there. And can I just tell you that I believe when Jesus says Christ followers are to be distinct, that we're to be salt and we're not supposed to lose our saltiness, I think he has something very specific in mind. And I don't think he means that we need to be distinctly annoying, and I don't think he means we need to be distinctly irritating, and I don't think he means we need to be distinctly harsh. What does he mean? Well, maybe I can frame it to you this way. So this next part's where I'm a little bit out of my league, so I'm just gonna confess that right now. But I wanna tell you a little bit of what I understand about the chemical composition of salt. All right, so this is all based off of about a half an hour of research on Google, all right? So what I understand, and if you understand this stuff and you're smart like that, you can come correct me afterwards and tell me where I got it wrong. But to the best that I understand it, when you talk about the chemical composition of salt, salt is always, always, always this. It is always a combination of sodium and chlorine. It is these two elements. It is sodium chloride. That is always what salt is. In other words, salt is never not that. It's always that. This is always salt. And so it doesn't matter what kind of salt we're talking about. It doesn't matter if it's table salt. It doesn't matter if it's Himalayan salt. It doesn't matter if it's, some fancy pants, sea salt that you bought from Trader Joe's for $20 because they promised it would be more flavorful or whatever. Salt is always, 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 always this. It's never not this. If you take these two elements and you break them apart, you don't have salt anymore. It's not salt. Now you can add other things to this, but this is all, if you were just to boil it down, what is the essence of salt? It's that right there. It's that right there. Now here's the question. So what characteristics make and comprise the essence of a follower of Jesus? What is it? What is it that makes them salt? And can I tell you, I believe that Jesus actually told us exactly what makes his followers distinct. I think he told us exactly what it is. And you might be thinking, well, where? Where did Jesus tell us those things? Well, remember what I said earlier? Context matters. Context matters a lot. And when did Jesus tell us what it means to be distinct? Right before this passage. Literally, the verses right before this. And some of you might be thinking, well, what are the verses right before this? Well, if you were with us, we actually just did a whole sermon series on it for 4 weeks. And what we talked about the introduction to Jesus' most famous sermon, sometimes called the Beatitudes. And what are the Beatitudes? The Beatitudes are the characteristics of a person who is part of the kingdom of God. They're the characteristics of a person who lives the blessed life according to Jesus. And what are those characteristics? Well, if you missed the series, let me just give you a real quick recap. He says, blessed are those who are poor in spirit, those who have a spiritual poverty and who recognize that they have a deep need for God. Blessed are those who mourn when they see the brokenness in their lives and the brokenness in the world around them. Blessed are the meek, those who are humble, who are willing to say, God, I need you, and I want to surrender myself to you. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, who desperately want to see the world put the way that God desires it to be. Blessed are the merciful, people who are eager to show mercy because they have been shown mercy by God. Blessed are the pure in heart. Blessed are the peacemakers, those who want to make peace. Blessed are those who are persecuted, who are willing to be persecuted because of doing the right thing. Now here's the crazy thing. If you don't know what these are, you can go back and you can listen to the last series. We spent 4 weeks talking about all of these characteristics. But here's what Jesus says. Jesus looks at these people. He says this to them. And then he says, you're blessed if you're this. And then he says, the very next passage, he says, and you are the salt. You are. In other words, I think Jesus is helping us here. I think what he's saying is that's the essence. That's what makes you distinct. And I think what Jesus is saying is if you lose your distinctiveness, if you lose those characteristics, you will lose your effectiveness. And so those of us who follow Jesus, it doesn't matter how loud your voice is. It doesn't matter how strong of an influence you might have. You may be incredibly involved in social activism. But if you don't embody the characteristics that you see here, if you lose your saltiness, then you've lost your distinctiveness. Right? If we've lost our distinctiveness, we've lost our effectiveness. If we compromise Christ-like character and we adopt the values and characteristics and methods of the world, I think we lose our effectiveness in a lot of different ways. And that actually leads to the last thing that I want to think about. And that's how do we engage? So practically speaking then, how then do we engage as salt? And so here is the part where honestly, I feel like this is where it gets incredibly simple. I think it gets incredibly simple. And maybe this might sound overly simple, but I think one of the most obvious things about salt is that we know that salt, the way salt is effective is it does 2 things. It's very, very easy. Salt just needs to do 2 things for it to be effective. Number 1, it needs to stay salt. Don't lose your essence. remain salt. And the second thing is this, it needs to spread out. And that's it. What does salt need to do to be effective? It needs to stay salt, and then it needs to spread out. It needs to spread out. It needs to get out. Salt that is clumped together, salt that is uninvolved, salt that is isolated is ineffective. It has to be involved. It has to be spread out. It has to get in. It has to move out is what salt has to do. And we all understand this, right? Like you think about in a meal, in the food that we eat. Salt is only good if it's spread out. No one eats a bowl of salt. That's disgusting. But salt, if you sprinkle it and you disperse it, it's amazing, especially if it's on an Auntie Anne's pretzel. Then it's a holy experience if you do that. That's what makes salt effective. It stays salt and it spreads out and it makes it effective. Here in Northeast Ohio, we have a great example that they didn't have in the first century, right? You think about snow, which we saw this morning, and maybe we'll see next month too. Who knows in Northeast Ohio. But if you got snow on your driveway, you got ice on your driveway, what do? You get salt. And what do? You get a spreader. This is why they sell salt spreaders and they sell salt shakers, because salt is intended not to be together, it's intended to go out. That's what it does. And for those who are followers of Jesus, I think that very, very simply, the application is this: stay salt, don't lose your saltiness, and then spread out, get involved, permeate, penetrate, get into the community, get into your job, be out there among other people and live as salt among those who are around you. If I could put it in a very simple equation, I just put it this way. I think the way it works is like this. We spend time with Jesus. We spend time with Jesus. We come to him and we surrender our lives to him. And as we surrender our lives to Jesus, and as we are poor in spirit, and as we're meek and we say, I want you to define and direct my life, he will transform us. And Jesus will make us into salt. And we will be people who hunger and thirst for righteousness. We will be people who desire to show mercy. We will be people who are willing to be persecuted for doing the right thing. And I think what happens is once we become salt, then we spread out and we get into the world. And when salt stays salt and when salt spreads out, salt will have the effect. It will. It just will, because that's what it's designed to do. You know, to me, I'll be honest with you, this is very liberating to me. And the reason it's liberating is because sometimes as a follower of Jesus, I can think that the way that we make an impact is that we need to have a big platform, or we need to have a political candidate, or sometimes I think, we need a large scale influence, we need a big event. That's how we're gonna make an impact in society. But I think what Jesus is saying is actually, those are fine, those things are good, but that's not the way you make an impact. Here's how you make an impact. You stay salt and you spread out. And you live out that life in front of the watching world, and it's going to have the impact that God desires. I love the way Sinclair Ferguson put it. Sinclair Ferguson is a Christian author, and he said, like salt, disciples of Jesus might feel small and insignificant and powerless in a society that's power mad. I know I feel that way sometimes. He says, yet they have the ability to influence every part of society, to penetrate the whole of society. Look, here's my guess. My guess is if you're a follower of Jesus in this room, there's probably a good chance that part of how you came to follow Jesus is because you had salt in your life. That's probably part of it. I could just tell you, some of you know my story a little bit. I came to know Christ when I was 17. And a big part of me coming to Christ was, I had salt in my life. I just did. I had salt. There were followers of Jesus who were strategically placed in my life, who lived as followers of Jesus, and it had an impact on me. And so, for example, I remember when I was in middle school and high school, I had a friend. And he was a good friend, one of my best friends, and we had a lot of common interests. And I remember he was a follower of Jesus, and I wasn't. And I remember he wasn't perfect, but he was different. He was different. And I remember our friends would be doing stuff, and there'd be times that he wouldn't go along with what we were doing. And that seemed weird to me. It seemed different to me. And I remember there was times that we'd be talking about stuff, and he wouldn't talk about the things we were talking about. And I remember that was weird to me. That was different. I remember there was times that he acted in ways that were different than the way that I would act. And I remember it was different to me. And you know what? It stuck out. And I'll be honest with you, it made me thirsty. It made me want to know, what makes you different? What makes you different? I had another person in my life. I had a guitar teacher. He was an older guy who was in my life. And at that point in my life, all of my heroes were guitar players. And so this guy was a guitarist, and he was awesome. He could totally shred, which made me respect him all the more. And he was in this band, and his band was awesome. And I remember I'd go see his band, and they would play in these venues. And I remember talking to him, and he was a follower of Jesus. And he was different. He looked different. He actually cared about me. He loved me. He would talk to me. And I'm like, this is like an older guy who I respected. He shared his faith with me. And you know what? I'll be honest with you, it made me thirsty. I thought, man, what makes you like that? I had an aunt in my life, in my family. And she looked different than everyone else in my family. She acted different than everyone else in my family. And she invited me to church, and you know what? I went with her. You know why? I was thirsty. What makes you different? What makes you tick? I don't understand it. I can't, but you're distinct. Now, here's the thing. This is the crazy thing to me. I don't think any of them thought for a moment that they were the salt of the world. I don't think they thought, what are you doing? I'm being salt. I don't think they thought that. I think they were just doing their best to follow Jesus. And they were spread out, and they were living that life in front of other people. And it had an effect, and it had an impact. And so let me just say, I think that this is a big part of the heart behind things like Love Medina, by the way. We're talking about Love Medina, going out and serving our community. What is the heartbeat behind that? It's this. We don't just want to be people who clutter together in a building. We don't just want to be people who clump together in different settings. We also want to be people who spread out. And we know this is an event, but our hope is that this event will train us into a certain mentality, into a certain lifestyle, that we can be people who are salt, who stay salt, and who get out, and who make a difference. I'm asked the band to come up, and as they settled in, let me just finish by saying this. If you are a follower of Jesus, okay, if you're a follower of Christ, you are the salt of the earth. You are the salt of the earth. And some of you might be thinking, yeah, but I don't feel like salt. I don't feel that way. Some of you might even be thinking, I don't want to be salt. Some of you might be thinking, can't I just be a Christian who goes to church sometimes and then doesn't go to hell one day? Can't I just do that? And let me just tell you, Jesus never gave you that label. Never. He said you're salt. And so what if we said, let's take that very seriously. Let's be salt. What if we said, let's not settle for just being Christians who clump together and Christians who come together and just have a hope that we're not going to go to hell one day? What if we live into the label that Jesus gave us, that we are the salt of the earth? And so you are the salt if you are a follower. You are the salt of your university. You are the salt in your school system. You are the salt in your workplace. We are the salt in our neighborhoods. We are the salt in the world around us. And we have no idea when we live distinct lives and when we spread out into our workplaces and into our universities, we have no idea who's watching. And we have no idea the impact that it might have. But salt, when it maintains its essence, it always, always, always will make its effects. Let's pray together. Well, Jesus, I do just want to say thank you that you are the salt of the earth. Thank you that you are the one who came into a broken, rotting, decaying world, and you entered in instead of staying out. And you displayed for us something utterly distinct. You lived a life that was so foreign to us. You came with power and authority, but you served. And then you showed us mercy. And you made peace with us. You showed us how to make peace with God. And because of that, we persecuted you. And you were willing to be persecuted because of righteousness. And you went to the cross. And then you rose again. And you've given us new life. And now when we follow you, you make us into the salt of the earth. So help us, Jesus. For those of us who follow you, help us, Lord, to see that we are blessed, not simply to be blessed, but we're blessed to be a blessing. That we are here because you love the world, because you care. And so help us, Lord, to live into the label that you gave us, that we are the salt and we are the light of the world. And so we just want to pray these things and ask it in Jesus' name. Amen.
There is a place, sorrow and love, the innocent Savior, broken and bleeding for us. Nails in his hands, and thorns on his brow. open, our sins are washed white in His blood. Lost and unworthy, and come find your home. The broken and hurting, and His love will never let go. The Son of God, high and lifted up, the Father love, He pouring down for us, and He has overcome. The spotless Lamb, for every sinner slain, our victory, our hope beyond the grave, and He has overcome, and He has overcome. Now my song will ever be of my Savior's love for me. And when at last His face I see, with all the saints in glory, sing with me. Now my song will ever be of my Savior's love for me. When at last His face I see, with all the saints in glory, the Son of God, high and lifted up, the Father love, keep pouring down for us, and He has overcome. The spotless Lamb, for every sinner slain, our victory, our hope beyond the grave, and He has overcome, and He has overcome, and He has overcome. We sing this again as a church. The Son of God. The Son of God, high and lifted up. Come on. The Father's love came pouring down for us, and He has overcome. Spotless. And the spotless Lamb, for every sinner slain, and our victory, our hope beyond the grave, and He has overcome. He has, and He has overcome.
You were the Word at the beginning, one with God, the Lord
pray with me this morning? Lord, thank you for that truth. God, what a powerful name it is. The name of Jesus. God, thank you for your word. That we're able to know you. And just as what Pastor Tony was saying, God, that you have labeled us salt of the earth. God, you've made us salt and light. And so, Father, thank you for the ways that you infuse in us those who have responded to you in faith. We would call ourselves followers of Jesus. You are infusing in us your power to be able to be salt, to be able to do that. Thank you, Lord, that you bolster that by your grace. So, Father, would you help us to believe that and to live from that place? Thank you, Lord, for the gospel and what it does. God, what you do through us, Father, to be able to be salt. Lord, we love you. Thank you that there's joy that's found in you, only in the person of Jesus Christ. Amen. We're going to sing one more song. I want to encourage you guys to sing it out with us. I was buried beneath my shame. You could carry that kind of weight. It was my turn till I met. Come on, would you clap with us this morning? Got a reason to celebrate. I was breathing, but not alive. Come on. All my failures I tried to hide. It was my turn till I met you. You sing with me this morning. You called my name, and I ran out of that grave. Out of the darkness into your glorious day. You called my name, and I ran out of that grave. Out of the darkness to your glorious day. Now your mercy has saved my soul. Yeah. Now your freedom is all that I know. The old made new. Jesus, when I met you, on His word, you called my name, and I ran out of that grave. Out of the darkness into your glorious day. You called my name, and I ran out of that grave. Out of the darkness to your glorious day. Let's sing this out. Let's declare this. What Jesus has done for us. Come on. I needed a rescue. My sin was heavy. The chains break at the weight of your glory. I needed shelter. I was an orphan. Now you call me a citizen of heaven. When I was broken, you were my healing. Your love is the air that I'm breathing. I have a future. My eyes are open. 'Cause when you
Hey guys, well thanks so much for coming out this weekend. I want to encourage you to come back as we're walking through this new series. I want to encourage you also, if you haven't had a chance to check out a life group, please do that this week. We'll have people in this corner that are willing and ready to pray with you. Also, as what Pastor Tony was saying, if you have a moment before you leave today to go to the Power Kids area and check out that wall to collect one of those discs to find out ways you can serve within our Power Kids area. Guys, we love you. We'll see you next weekend. Take care.